What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. The big headline for today's show is the unveiling of the U.S. women's national team squad for the World Cup. Then I'm going to get to some transfer news, specifically talking about what's happening at Chelsea with players coming in, players coming out. Before that, though, as I mentioned, the U.S. Women's National Team World Cup squad officially dropped today, Wednesday, June 21st. I was in the press conferences afterward, heard for some players, and of course, head coach Vladko Andonovski. So I'm going to kind of lay some of that out as we go through to provide that additional perspective on what they actually said collectively, but specifically what Vladko Andonovski said about the decisions that were made. Just going position group by position group here and going to touch on kind of the big talking points as we go along. Goalkeepers, the first two, Casey Murphy, Alyson Ayer, not a big surprise. And then you got to the third option, which kind of came down to A.D. Franch and Aubrey Kingsbury. There are more impactful decisions that I want to spend the most time on because it is incredibly unlikely. Obviously, the third goalkeeper is going to play. This is Alyson Ayer's position. That hasn't changed. The one thing I will say, though, before I quickly move on, is certainly there's an argument for A.D. Franch, plenty of U.S. women's national team experience. One of the themes that Andonovski kept hitting on is the importance, and specifically in positions and those kind of final roster spots, the importance of form and performances in the NWSL this season. And there is no disputing Aubrey Kingsbury has been significantly better than A.D. Franch. So if you don't have much between them to start with, to me, it is not surprising the way that Vladko Andonovski was talking that he went with the more in-form option. I'm not going to sit here and kind of break this down. To me, it's just not an efficient use of time. You had four goalies, three of them were going to make it, and it is ultimately Audrey Kingsbury who gets the call instead of A.D. Franch. Then we get to the outside backs. I am not including Emily Sonnet on this part of the list because I'm going to talk about Emily Sonnet with the center backs because of the way this roster broke down. You look at it and you have to assume she's the backup center back option. So that is why she is not included with the outside backs, although obviously she can play anywhere on the back line. Made more sense to put her with the center backs. So you're talking about Crystal Dunn, Emily Fox, Sofia Huerta, Kelly O'Hara. To me, Emily Fox deserved to be on this team. Sofia Huerta has kind of been your starting right back, her and Kelly O'Hara, so it's not a surprise to see those names. I wasn't surprised or upset by any of this. To me, this makes sense. The other thing I will mention here, because it's going to keep probably getting brought up, and Crystal Dunn was asked about it. She was one of the players that talked to the media today. Obviously, she is excelling playing higher up the field for Portland. That is her natural position. She has done this for years where she is used to just completely changing her approach and playing left back instead of in the midfield. There's always this question, though, of will that change for the national team? Will she get to play in midfield? Julie Foudy asked her about it today. Crystal Dunn said, no, that's not really been a conversation. And the way she was talking, I don't see her playing midfield for this team. Or at least, Crystal Dunn doesn't see herself playing midfield for this team. I am pretty confident saying that based on the way that she was talking about her role on the team and the possibility of that happening. I don't see it. And that's based on Crystal Dunn not seeing it. Never say never, but if you're expecting to see some Crystal Dunn in the midfield, I think you're going to be out of luck. And again, that is based on Crystal Dunn actually answering a question. That's not some kind of intel I have or my own conclusion. That's based off of what Crystal Dunn said today after the roster came out. But I mentioned I'm a huge Emily Fox fan. You get the experience with Kelly O'Hara. Sofia Huerta has been part of this core group for a little while now. To me, this is just what makes sense. The interesting part of this is the center backs and how this is all going to play out. Obviously, the big name missing here is Becky Sauerbrunn. Just before this roster got announced, she made it public that she was not going to be able to participate because of injury, and that just changes the equation because not only is she the captain and a starting center back, it just kind of shifts everything around and is a new puzzle that Andonovski has to put together. And basically, the way that this was solved was by not replacing her with a true center back. I don't necessarily have an issue with that in and of itself. I will discuss my biggest gripe with this roster when we get to the next position. But obviously, Naomi Girma is going to make this team. Alana Cook, it was going to be the third center back. Those three were pretty much locks if you throw Sauerbrunn in there. And so then you start looking at, okay, so what are your other options to fill this slot that was going to be Becky Sauerbrunn? And one option is bringing Emily Sonnet as your emergency center back. And so basically just kind of adding an extra versatile defender, which in a squad with 23 instead of 26 players has a significant amount of value. Or you can start looking at other center back options, and specifically Tierna Davidson. I would not have an issue with Tierna Davidson making this team at the expense of one of the outside backs. What I will say, though, is, again, the big takeaway I had from Andonovski talking, well, I guess it was two things, and both of them play in here. One, the importance of form when making those difficult decisions, and two, the versatility part. And so, two of your kind of next options in defense are Casey Kruger and Tierna Davidson, who are playing for what is far and away the NWSL's worst defensive team. Now, that doesn't mean they can't have a spot on the roster because club-wise it's not going well. But when you're trying to break ties and you have some of your other options playing for a team that's really struggling and struggling in the area that they are that they are responsible for, I totally see why Vlatko Andonovski went the way he did with this and chose to kind of just piece together the extra center back options. Because you have to assume, Naomi Girma is starting, and you would have to assume that's your starting center back duo, her and Alana Cook. Now, I'm going to switch and start talking about the holding midfielders to continue this conversation and where my concern is, because it relates to the center backs. So Julie Ertz makes this team. Not surprising, especially with some of the players who weren't available. You had some roster spots open up. And so your three holding midfielders on this team, Julie Ertz, Christy Mewis, Andy Sullivan. I'm just putting them together as the players who could possibly play at that number 6 position because the other 4 midfielders are more focused up the field. So these are just kind of your, if it wasn't Julie Ertz, as she's been gone from this team, you've seen a lot of Christy Mewis and Andy Sullivan filling in for her. So I just put all 3 of them together. My big concern is that one of the things Vlatko Andonovski said was that there has been conversation and consideration given to playing Julie Ertz at center back because of the situation and because you don't have Becky Sauerbrunn. Which makes a lot of sense because, again, you get extra roster spots by having somebody like Julie Ertz and somebody like Emily Sonnet who can play center back and can play other positions. So you can mix and match if you need to. But what that leaves you, if Julie Ertz is one of your center back options, is the possibility that you don't have Julie Ertz holding midfield for you, playing in that number 6 position. In which case, you are right back where you've been the past couple of years with the same players who have been unable to adequately replace what Julie Ertz gives you. It is my one criticism and my one issue with this team heading into the World Cup above all else. I talked about this after qualifying. They have not figured out how to replace Julie Ertz in that number 6 spot. And it's been a lot of Andy Sullivan, and it's been some Christy Mewis. And so when Julie Ertz got brought back into the fold, kind of out of nowhere, and it became clear that the plan was to take her to the World Cup, or at least open the door for that possibility, I stressed how important of a development that was for this team. To me, if you are not 100% confident that Julie Ertz is going to be playing in the midfield in every game that you want to put your best 11 out for, Sam Coffey should have been on this roster. I don't know what else Sam Coffey has to do to prove that she deserves the legitimate opportunity to play that position. Because it's not like the other options have been so good that there's just no room for her to get a chance. And clearly she is just not one of Vlatko Andonovski's people. Or at least not yet. And of course, she's super young in her career. But I would have had her on this plane. Because to me, she is the best alternative at this moment in time to Julie Ertz. And now that you're bringing in the possibility of Julie Ertz playing center back in an emergency situation here, because you only have 2 center backs on the roster, and maybe the plan is to use Emily Sonnet exclusively as a center back, and, you know, if you have the ability to rotate in game 3, it's Sonnet starting at center back and Ertz is going to play midfield, and it's just we've thought about this, we don't want to actually bring her to center back. I don't know that part. But to me, the biggest risk, the biggest decision was not having a second holding midfielder that you feel confident can go in and do the job to a level close to Julie Ertz. And Sam Coffey and Julie Ertz are not the same player, but they command the midfield in a way that you have not seen Christy Mewis and Andy Sullivan do. And so, yeah, it cost you somebody on the roster to bring Sam Coffey. I would have done it. Because you're opening yourself up to the possibility of history repeating itself here. If Julie Ertz is not in that spot. Whether it's a yellow card suspension, whether it's an injury, whether it's because she's playing center back. I would feel much better knowing that I have somebody that might just be able to be a decent replacement. And you just look at the results since Julie Ertz has, stepped away from the team. And what you're missing is somebody to control the midfield and dictate the terms of the game. Set the tempo. Start moving the ball up the field to get it to your incredibly gifted attacking midfielders who we'll talk about next. Sam Coffey does a lot of that awfully well. So she might not have been the highest profile player to miss this roster, because there's a striker we're going to talk about later too. But that is my one kind of mental hurdle with this roster. I like a lot of the way that this played out and the decisions that were made. The combination of 2 true center backs and not having and there is no proven alternative to Julie Ertz because Sam Coffey isn't proven at the international level either, and I acknowledge that. But not having something you feel can be a plan B scares me. And hopefully, Germa and Cook just play every meaningful minute so Ertz can play in the midfield, and this is a non-conversation. But I want to bring that point up because if there is, and this is the way I'll put it, if there is one player who is not on this roster that at the end of the World Cup, people, whether that's media, fans, Vlatko Andonovski, will be looking back and saying, I wish we would have brought her. And that was a mistake. To me, it's Sam Coffey, and it's not close. I might be wrong on that. That's where I'm at right now, though. And I'm going to need to see something different than we've seen, or have Julie Ertz be exclusively a midfielder for me to change my mind about that. I've mentioned the attacking midfielders, so let's get to them now. One of your other kind of last choices in Savannah DeMello. Really happy to see Savannah DeMello on this team. She has been absolutely sensational for Racing Louisville. And in a spot where, you're theoretically, you have two starters and two backups for these two midfield spots next to your holding midfielder. And obviously, Lindsey Horan and Rose Lavelle would have had to do something absolutely incomprehensible to not make this team. And Ashley Sanchez has been consistently part of this group. So those three were pretty much locks. But you got the option for the fourth player. And, there were, Christy Mewis can play higher up the field. You had some different options. But to me, Savannah DeMello has done more than enough to earn this opportunity. And it's not like you're trying to make decisions for, 6 months from now. You're starting this camp soon. You're playing games in a month. Go take the in-form attacking midfielder who's scoring goals, it seems like, every single week. And that's all you're going to ask her to do, right? She's not going to start. She's not going to have this huge responsibility. But if you are looking for somebody to change a game off the bench, to provide something, that spark, that moment of quality, to me, that is your best option outside of the three that you were already going to choose. I'm a huge fan of that decision from Vlatko Andonovski to bring Savannah DeMello, and the other three are, not a surprise at all, so there's not too much to break down there. Next, going to who I am categorizing as the wingers. And I'm going to get to my big point about this 6-woman strike force at the end. But I'm dividing it between wingers and strikers based on where I'm assuming they're going to play for this team. Kind of similar to the whole Emily Sonnet situation in defense. So your wingers, as I am categorizing them, Megan Rapinoe, Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith, Alyssa Thompson. I've seen some grumbling about Rapinoe. I don't know if that is more just generally because she's a high-profile figure culturally, or if it's actually people who watch women's soccer consistently. All I know is if you're talking about kind of your sixth attacker, that extra player, and you're right, this isn't somebody who's going to start, who's going to play big minutes. I want the person who is a, emotional, kind of the emotional heartbeat of this team, who has all of this experience and incredibly dangerous quality on set pieces. Because that is something that you don't have all that much of in this team if you're going to get really specific. You don't have kind of set piece specialists. And so you're in a tie game in the semifinals in the 75th minute. Yeah, bring on Megan Rapinoe to go take a couple set pieces as you try and get a winning goal. She had to, it's not about whether she right now is a quote-unquote better player than whoever you would have brought, let's just say Midge Purse. It is about which player adds the most value collectively and improves your chances of winning the most. And there are not 6 attackers who provide more contributions toward winning a World Cup than Megan Rapinoe. It is that simple for me. And then Trinity Rodman, no surprise, especially after Mallory Swanson got hurt. She was going to make the team anyway and was certainly going to make the team after Mallory Swanson was unavailable. Sophia Smith, arguably the best player in the world, she was going to be there too. The last name on this list is Alyssa Thompson. I don't know if I've actually talked about this on video all that much, but Alyssa Thompson is currently carrying an NWSL team in attack. Well, taking high school classes. She is that good already. And if you watch Angel City play, it is so clear that their best opportunity to create scoring chances is to just give Alyssa Thompson the ball. My apologies, they're having some technical difficulties. My computer enjoys shutting itself down every once in a while. So that is what happened there. I apologize. Back to my point about Alyssa Thompson. Alyssa Thompson, like I said, is carrying an NWSL attack. There are not 4 more dangerous wingers in the league right now than her. This is not about the future. This is not about preparing her and just kind of giving her the benefit of the doubt because she's clearly part of the long-term plan for this program. This is about her having earned this spot now. She is that good. And again, you've got to assume the starters are going to be Trinity Rodman and Sophia Smith on the wings. Who do I want coming in the 75th minute of a 1-1 game or an extra time against tired defenders? I want Alyssa Thompson, who is so good one-on-one and so dynamic and so technically gifted. I absolutely love this. I am 100% here for it. I would have had this exact same group. So I have no complaints in that area whatsoever. I am thrilled for Alyssa Thompson. She earned this. This is not about some kind of long-term investment. She deserves a spot on this team because of what she is doing for Angel City. And then finally, you have the strikers. I am considering Lynn Williams a striker because you would have to assume she's the first choice if Alex Morgan, for whatever reason, is not starting. And a lot has been made about this idea that there is no clear replacement for Alex Smith. Sorry, Alex Morgan. I don't know why I just said Alex Smith. This idea being Alex Morgan is clearly your starting number 9. And had you brought Ashley Hatch, you would have a like-for-like replacement or to start a third game in the group stage or whatever. Here's my pushback to that. And Vlatko Andonovski made this point in the press conference today. So he's thinking the exact same thing I was. Look at this list of attacking players. Lynn Williams plays as a striker for her club. Trinity Rodman plays in a striker like position for her club. Sophia Smith plays as a striker for her club. Alyssa Thompson, at times, has played as a striker for her club. Just because these players typically play on the wing for the women's national team, the 4 times a year they get called up for international duty, does not mean that's the only position they can play for this team. Outside of Alex Morgan, this attack is a collection of some of the best strikers in the league, in the NWSL. To me, there is no reason to specifically go get a second number 9 just to have a second number 9 from a national team perspective. And I understand it's not the same thing, and you're asked to do different things, you're playing a different system, all that. But I trust the Lynn Williams and the Sophia Smiths of the world to be able to figure out if they need to. And so, especially when you lose Mal Swanson, because as much as I just gushed over Alyssa Thompson, she's not on this team probably if Mallory Swanson is healthy. Just take the best alternative. And if you want to say that you like Ashley Hatch better than Lynn Williams, that's a fair issue to have, a fair conversation, a fair point to raise. And that's one of those things you don't know what the right answer is. Lynn Williams could go score 3 goals in this tournament, and you could argue that Ashley Hatch would have scored the exact same 3 if she were in that position. Who knows how this plays out? Or, Lynn Williams has a bad moment, and you would argue that Ashley Hatch would have finished that opportunity, but you also don't know that. So this again goes back to what I've been harping on about form. Lynn Williams has been phenomenal for Gotham. Just got a new contract. She's been terrific. Ashley Hatch has been really good too. I have brought up last week, actually, on this very show, I brought up this idea that the analytics, the expected goals will tell you that Ashley Hatch should be scoring even more than she is. Can only trust expected goals so much. It was a really close call. But that's the debate to me, that's the debate you're having here, is which player would you rather have? It's not about the position. Because, honestly, all these players are being forced to play out of their natural position for the U.S. women's national team, not the other way around. The team they train with every day, the team they play with for 75% of their season, most of these quote-unquote wingers are strikers or have some situations where they play in that position. And this is what I love about Sophia Smith. I have never seen a player so good at every aspect of every position along the front line that can slide so seamlessly between winger and striker. Her all-around skill set is remarkable. But she's a striker. She doesn't have to play there. But to me, in the most natural position, all other things being equal, she's a number 9. So I am not worried at all about this idea that you don't have a second striker. You got plenty of players that can play that position. The goal should be, especially with this attack and how many incredible options you have, go pick your best 6. The 6 you think are going to contribute the most to winning. You know you have a striker in Alex Morgan. She's one of the first players you're going to pick. After that, go get a couple of true wingers. That's done. Megan Rapinoe, Alyssa Thompson. And then just pick your best players, whoever you want to go with. Don't worry about whether they're strikers or wingers, because it's with this team in particular, they're so versatile, it's all the same thing in the end. They can do whatever they need to for this team. I'm not worried about it. So that is your U.S. Women's National Team roster. Feel free to comment. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like about the roster, players you thought should have made it. I will continue to go to bat for Sam Coffey. We're going to see how this plays out, but I intend to revisit that conversation if it needs to come up if Julie Ertz is not playing every single important minute at that number 6 position for this team. Going to take my first break. When I come back, just some quick transfer talk. A lot is happening at Chelsea. İlkay Gündoğan is on his way to Barcelona, so I'm going to break all that down, provide some thoughts on the latest transfer news before getting into the weekend look ahead. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. As I mentioned before the break, it is time for some transfer talk, starting with the semi-official move of İlkay Gündoğan to Barcelona. Fabrizio Romano has given it the here we go. It's not official yet, but everybody is in agreement this is what is happening, and İlkay Gündoğan has ultimately chosen Barcelona. So I feel comfortable talking about this because by the time of next week's show, it'll probably be, 3-4 days old, and he will have already taken his pictures and signed and done the official stuff. So I'm going to talk about it now. Obviously, his resume and his skill speaks for itself. The biggest part of this for me in the story here is that, once again, Barcelona have found a, relatively speaking, cheap way to get better. This team is not where it needs to be in terms of competing for a Champions League, and this team is also trying to stay ahead of a Real Madrid team that signed Jude Bellingham and is coming after a disappointing season. And now you have to go try and defend a La Liga title instead of chasing it as, the team trying to get back on top. İlkay Gündoğan is about the most efficient way to help all of that. He's going to be expensive, but this is the best option that Barcelona had out there in terms of a free transfer, in terms of somebody, you're not going to find another player, I would argue, available on the open market like this that is actually going to elevate that Barcelona midfield the way that Gündoğan can. Because he's, these guys call. I think I saw something about a rumored $500 million Euro release clause or something like that. Now, he's not worth anything near that, but the point being, you're not supposed to be able to get a guy like this on a free transfer. So this is a home run for me. Barcelona had to find a way to get better, to improve that squad, and they had to find a way to do it without spending big money again, because everybody's watching them at this point. And they seem to have found a way to convince Gündoğan they're going to be able to register him, and of course you get the benefit of not having a transfer fee. It's the best possible case scenario for Barcelona. Does it change how I feel about them versus Real Madrid? No, not really. I stand by what I said. Right now, they're the more reliable team in La Liga. And if you ask me which team has a better chance of winning the Champions League, the answer is Real Madrid. And now that Real Madrid have Jude Bellingham, even in La Liga, it's getting pretty close. But Gündoğan is the kind of player that at least sort of forces me to pump the brakes on saying that Real Madrid have completely closed the gap and moved past Barcelona. I've gone on and on about Real Madrid. I don't need to do it here. If you listen to me, you know how I feel about them and the way that this is all being kind of presented in the narrative that's being formed. But this is, like I said, best case scenario. He was the one guy you probably could have made this work with if you're Barcelona and they ended up getting him. Congratulations. Excellent piece of business. I don't know that it changes all that much in terms of the ceiling, but you've got a lot of things you have to maintain and elevate. And Gundogan is going to help you do that. And then I want to spend just a few minutes talking about Chelsea. You got players coming in, you got players leaving, and most of those players that are leaving are headed to Saudi Arabia. Supposedly, it's looking like eventually you're going to get deals done for Edouard Mendy, Kalidou Koulibaly, and Hakim Ziyech, in addition to N'Golo Kante. Then you had Kai Havertz going to Arsenal, which again got a here we go from Fabrizio Romano, but is not officially announced yet. And Mateo Kovacic, I believe, is also a here we go to Manchester City. So I'm just going to talk about all of this collectively, whether one of these deals ends up falling through for whatever reason. The broader points are the same. And as I mentioned with Gundogan, this could all be official in a matter of days and kind of outdated news by the time of next week's show. So the first thing here is Chelsea doing a terrific job finding a way to start getting guys away from this bloated squad and to start making this make sense. Getting a lot of help from Saudi Arabia to do it, but they're doing it nonetheless. And I encourage people to go read. I don't remember who the author is, I apologize, but The Athletic published a piece about the connections between Clear Lake Capital, the company that Todd Boehly is connected with, that kind of is the one that actually owns Chelsea. I don't remember all the details on that, but when you think Boehly, think Clear Lake Capital and the PIF and this idea that it's all kind of working together. And basically the Athletics article talked to a bunch of experts who said that that's not really the case here. It's much more of just, this is a new place to appease players who are on really expensive contracts that the top clubs in Europe don't want anymore. Because it's hard to convince somebody to take these contracts and to convince the player they actually want to go to that club. And so Saudi Arabia is, and this was always kind of talked about, right, that it could become this place to get out of expensive contracts because they're willing to pay ridiculous amounts of money. And so Chelsea are taking advantage as the squad that needs in the world that needs to get rid of the most high profile, expensive players that aren't particularly valuable at this moment in time. And so it's starting to go that way. On the reverse side of this, Christopher Nkunku is finally, I believe, official. And it also appears that Nico Jackson is close to getting a deal done. I'm just going to talk more about Nkunku, but both of these I really like. I am a huge Christopher Nkunku guy. He is a significant upgrade to every other player they have in attack right now until somebody starts producing at a much higher level. He was sensational and has been for Leipzig. He's the kind of player that they've been trying to find with all this money they've been spending. And none of these guys are on his level, at least yet. Not yet. And from a production standpoint, maybe Raheem Sterling kind of was at one point, but he wasn't last season. This, to me, has the potential to be one of the signings of the season in terms of most impactful players. That's how highly I think of him. Now, the interesting part of this is you look at most of the guys who are leaving. They do not play the same position. Now, Hakim Ziyech does. But they don't play the same position as Christopher Nkunku. This midfield is Enzo Fernandez, maybe Conor Gallagher, maybe Callum Hudson-Odoi, maybe Mason Mount, and that's about it. And you've heard at least some level of transfer speculation with all of those guys except for Enzo Fernandez. He's the one dude who's going to be here. But you're hearing about maybe Hudson-Odoi. Manchester United, it seems, are trying to pry Mason Mount away. And so the overall construction of this roster is still so unbalanced with all of these wingers and no number 9. Now, yeah, you could play Nkunku through the middle, and maybe that's what happens. I don't know what the plan is. Now, Romelu Lukaku is currently a Chelsea player. I don't see that continuing. But you need to reinforce that midfield still, even if you keep some of the guys I just mentioned, but especially if Mason Mount goes. And you could use another center back. You still got a bunch of outside backs, not all of whom can play at the same time. It is still kind of a mess, but it's a mess that makes more sense at least. And the other thing you did is you finally actually got a player that's going to make your team better. Because Nkunku is way more accomplished than any of these other guys they brought in over the last year. Way more. He is on a whole different level. So it still doesn't solve the problem, but you're making progress. They're having a very good summer based on where they started. The problem is you have to also remember where they started. You know, it's kind of I don't want to celebrate you for doing what you kind of had to do because you had no other choice, right? And then the final thing I want to talk about here is the Kai Havertz to Arsenal that appears to be any day, any hour officially announced. I don't get this for Arsenal, especially at the rumored price tag. I don't know what they need him for. I don't know where he fits into that starting lineup. This is a team that also has, 4 strikers, 3 of which produced at a good level last season. I know Gabriel Jesus kind of tailed off and then got hurt, and it looked like he was on the going to have this phenomenal season at the beginning when he was contributing a goal every game, it seemed like. And even when he played more, it didn't end up being that. Sorry. But you're certainly not expecting Kai Havertz to be the one to solve that problem. I trust Gabriel Jesus way more than I trust Kai Havertz. And you're not playing him underneath because that's your captain. And arguably your best player. So to me, the only way this makes sense is for him to be the second, the cover for Martin Odegaard and the cover for Gabriel Jesus. And you are paying way too much to have a guy come off your bench. I don't see where there's a spot in the starting lineup for him. It's the same thing with Spurs and Richarlison last season. And at least there, you went, okay, they have a front 3 that is difficult to break into, but you're not going to use that front 3 in every single game. Richarlison gave you that 4th option to play in a Champions League group stage game or to start in the Premier League the weekend before the Champions League game. Things like that. You need more than 3 reliable strikers. So even though it was a disastrous season, there was some logic in that idea of we need to go get another really good attacker. Arsenal already have Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard, Trossard. You can throw Eddie Nketiah in there if you want. And then, your other academy products. I mean, Lauren Balogun, currently an Arsenal player, scored 20-plus goals in Ligue 1 last season. And now you're throwing Kai Havertz into that. And one of the things that Arsenal really improved at last season was finishing. And Kai Havertz doesn't do that. I don't I just don't see where he elevates this team. And if you're paying that much for somebody, they better elevate your team. Now, clearly Mikel Arteta sees something, and maybe he can get more out of him. You know, he looked like a genius for getting Jesus there for a little while until it all, he had the bad stretch and then the injury and all that. So, really difficult to judge just how good of a signing that was and how good he actually is when he's kind of leading an attack. But if I'm a fellow top four competitor, I am not bailing Chelsea out that way and giving something close to quote unquote market value for Kai Havertz. I am fascinated to see how this goes because Arsenal already have four starting attackers. Because Trossard was great, and he's their fourth best attacker. And also, Kai Havertz isn't playing on the wing. To me, if there's something you want, I mean, I guess you... Nah, I take that back. I know I'm not the only one that's scratching my head on about this. Whatever he provides in terms of these dangerous runs and getting into good positions, Arsenal don't need more of that. They do just fine. They could use another playmaker. And especially if this ends up being a Odegaard, Rice, somebody else midfield. And I guess maybe that's that you play Odegaard deeper. I don't get what the plan is. I'm gonna be very curious to see what these lineups look like and whether Kai Havertz is a starter. Because the money tells you he has to be. Otherwise, you just wasted a lot on a guy you could have found somebody. Right? If you're looking for a supporting, kind of a high-profile supporting person to add to the attack, go after James Maddison. There's no way he's going to cost you more than Kai Havertz if this money is true. I think it's something like $60 million. Go swoop in and take James Maddison. You can play him next to Martin Odegaard. He's going to give you something. He's going to give you a creativity that you don't have outside of Odegaard right now. Kai Havertz isn't that guy. He's not a finisher. He's not a creator. So that just kind of leaves you wondering what exactly does he do really well. And I know the analytics people will tell you he makes good runs. He gets into good positions. There is some value in that for specific teams. But when the system works as well as Arsenal's system works, and when you have other guys who get into those good positions and who are really good finishers, specifically your two wingers, where does that leave him? I'm just going in circles at this point. This one just really confuses me. And certainly, if you're an Arsenal fan, you have to hope that this is completely independent of Declan Rice. Declan Rice has to be priority number one. Because it looks like you might be losing both other midfielders, and he is significantly better than both other midfielders anyway. He is the kind of guy who takes you to the next level. You get him, and you get a healthy William Saliba, we might just have ourselves a title race next season. Especially if Manchester City aren't able to hold on to some of these pieces and aren't able to bring in some big signings. I mean, Mateo Kovacic is fine. He's a nice depth piece. I'm not concerned about him if I'm Arsenal. I am more concerned about Josko Gvardiol. But even then, that's a team that doesn't give up many goals anyway. It just seems like a really, really expensive price to pay for something you're not really sure what you're getting. But Mikel Arteta's earned the benefit of the doubt. If he sees something here, I will give him all the credit in the world if it works, because it seems that everybody's kind of in agreement that this is very strange. But like I said, I'm going in circles. I don't really have anything substantial to add. So we're going to move forward and take our next break. When I come back, as always, the weekend look ahead, taking a look at the biggest matchups coming up in the next few days. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one final time to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, finishing out the show with the weekend look ahead. Rather quiet one this week without a lot of big time international / European action going on because, of course, everybody's kind of on vacation at this point. So, Major League Soccer. Couple games I want to highlight, all of them on Saturday. Nashville at Columbus, Cincinnati at DC United. This is another one of those games for Cincinnati. They've been good on the road, specifically lately. Can they keep that up? To me, that's going to be kind of the question with the Supporters' Shield, is they're going to be the best team at home this season. I am convinced of that. Can they do enough on the road to not let this get interesting? Because they have such an advantage at this point with LAFC's struggles and, Gold Cup, all this stuff. They are in control. You don't have to win every road game. But games like this, against a good, not great opponent that you are certainly better than, is that 1 point more often than not, or is that 3? Because if the answer is 3, the Supporters' Shield race is pretty much wrapped up. That's how I'm feeling at this point. Toronto at New England. New England near the top of the East. Toronto trying to get this thing going. Houston at Austin. I always like to highlight these Texas derbies. And, a Houston team that just beat LAFC twice. Austin not off to a great start. Can this game be the one to kind of kickstart things? Or can Houston continue this run they're on? And then St. Louis at San Jose. San Jose quietly off to a really good start. Obviously, St. Louis too. So that's one of your better matchups of the weekend just from a standings standpoint. And then in the NWSL, also some really good games this weekend, starting with Friday night, the Washington Spirit at Portland Thorns. All kinds of World Cup players specifically for the U.S., but not exclusively the U.S. in that game. OL Reign at San Diego Wave on Saturday. Another really, really good one with a bunch of, U.S. Women's National Team players that just heard their name called. And then Houston at Angel City on Sunday. I talked about the San Diego Wave Angel City matchup last week in the weekend look ahead. Angel City got that win, came from behind to do it. Sydney Leroux, Julie Ertz played together, started for the first time. There is a playoff team in there. The question is, will they have enough time? Because their schedule was front-loaded, so they played, I think it was 7 of their first 11 games at home. And they're more than halfway done with the season. And not particularly close to the playoffs at this point. Now, what that win did is it kept the door open. It got them back into a position where you look at it and you go, this is doable. You also are losing Julie Ertz and Alyssa Thompson to the World Cup, which is, the schedule is designed to make that not that big of a deal when it comes to the NWSL regular season. but you just never know the impact that has the rest of the way. But if they are healthy and those three, LaRue, Ertz, and Thompson are playing, they absolutely have a chance to pull this off and to make a really impressive surge at the end of the season. You got to win your home games. You got to take advantage of having all those players available one final time this weekend. So that game is on Sunday. And then the other thing I want to mention real quick, a couple interesting games in the Gold Cup as that gets underway with, the B squads for Canada, Mexico, US, and better teams for the rest of the teams that didn't just play in the CONCACAF Nations League. But Saturday, USA, Jamaica. I always like this matchup. Jamaica continues to add Premier League players, which makes this really interesting. Andre Blake in net, all of that. And then Mexico, Honduras on Sunday. One of Mexico's tougher tests early on in this tournament. See how that B team looks and just kind of go from there. But that is your international competition of note taking place over the weekend. That is all for the weekend look ahead. That is all for today's show. Thank you so much for joining. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.